Bowie, we're taking a walk down Gerontology Avenue today. Are you excited
That's
for the ride?
I'm very excited to go on the journey, the long experience, the talk about life. Love it.
Mm-hmm. And it is across the lifespan. We've got Taree Gibson on today, who is a titled gerontological physiotherapist. She has a really interesting and unusual role that she'll tell you about. And she has a real gift with telling stories and connecting with people and shifting mindsets around the work that she does. So let's get stuck straight into it. It's a compelling listen.
You're a little knitted blanket over you.
Oh,
Get into your gerontological mindset. It's going to be great.
absolutely. Rug on the knees, and there is something for everyone. So let's get started. Hello and welcome along, Taree. It's so great to have you on today. And I think a great place to get started would be having a little intro to your current role and the story of how you got there, and also explain to us how it's a little bit of an unusual role for a physio.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Karen and Bowie. I am currently working as one of the cognition clinical leads within my health service. So my role is predominantly around capacity building for clinicians and staff who interact with inpatients and those accessing our health service who may present with cognitive impairment, predominantly dementia and delirium, which are common intersections that we see with older adults who are accessing our health services. So my role is around knowledge and skill and capacity building when interacting with these patients, challenging our mindsets around standard care delivery versus what it means to provide dementia-friendly care, as well as education is a huge proponent of my role. I also am involved in quality improvement and research projects that aim to increase the standard of care for those in our community who are accessing services that might have cognitive diversity. But I suppose to understand me falling into this role, I have to talk about my passion for gerontology, which is, I suppose, what led me down this path, a path that is still not completely revealed to me and a path that I'm still sort of stumbling through and using my flashlight to illuminate different corners of. It's still an ongoing journey. But for me, my passion for working with older adults did start at university. I went to the University of Notre Dame, which I have a fellow Notre Damer in the room here with me.
Yeah.
And I remember so clearly sitting in our first gerontology lecture with Professor Anne-Marie Hill next to my best friend, and she spoke, I think she was talking about vitamin D, or she was talking about UTIs or something very non-specific. But the way that she came alive in talking about the role that physios have in working with older adults, her passion and her advocacy, something just lit up inside my heart, and I knew immediately, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to work in the gerontology space. I want to work with older adults. I want to advocate. I want to meet their needs in a sort of changing, aging population and the challenges that that's going to present in the future. So it was such a clear lightning bolt moment for me wanting to work in the space of gerontology, but it is such a vast landscape, right? So gerontology is something that feels a little bit nebulous, I think, to physios in its vastness, difficult to define, difficult to understand. But my challenge to physios is to think about the age in which they are interacting with their patients. And a lot of the time, it is that older adult population, and therefore there's a little bit of a gerontological physio in all of us, would be my challenge. Unless we're working specifically in the peds space, physios interact a lot of the time with our older adults in the community. So we are all a little bit of a gerontological physiotherapist. So My journey started in the university classroom. I went and did my hospital rotations as a junior. I then moved into the residential aged care space, which is where I met the wonderful Karen originally many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I entered back into both the private and the public hospital healthcare systems in a blend of clinical and management roles until I landed back into the public system as a clinician. This role, this cognition clinical lead role, was a parental leave contract. And there was a little voice inside me that said, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about cognitive impairment. I would like to learn more about dementia and delirium and how physios have a role in that space. And so I threw my resume in thinking that as a physio, not having that baseline undergrad real knowledge base in brain changes or cognition in general. It's generally not something that we spend a lot of time in it as an undergraduate. I was really certain that there wouldn't be a scope for me in that role. I was lucky enough that the stars aligned and I was successful in that parental leave cover role. And I was in that for a year and recognized that there actually is a role for physiotherapy in these spaces. And I wrote a business case saying as such, and I'm lucky to still be in this space. So that's, I guess, the journey of how I've arrived here. And as I said before, I'm still figuring out what that looks like.
You created that
That's
luck, though. And is it OTs that normally have been more traditionally in the space, Taree? Is that right?
Yes, I would
Mm-hmm.
say that occupational therapy, with their vast knowledge of the brain and cognition and specialist training, have traditionally been in these roles, as well as geriatricians and neuropsychologists, those types of specialized fields for sure.
Terry, firstly, like that, it's so enjoyable just to listen to your journey and hear your passion behind it. It's interesting. I went to a presentation a couple of weeks ago where I heard from Anne-Marie, and she said this one quote that stuck with me, which is, I don't know what motivation is, but I know it's contagious. And I feel like you may have just caught that bug from her. And so that's lovely to see that kind of passion from one clinician kind of pass on to the next. I guess with gerontology, look, I'm a musk physio, so there's lots of things I'm going to ask today that I don't know about. But with gerontology, I feel like sometimes it's the unsung hero in a lot of spaces. You know, it's working with patients that are dealing with, you know, potentially lifelong or later in life, or these considerations maybe around things that may I find difficult to resolve as a musk physio. We think very much in kind of, I guess, maybe shorter terms, you know, from start A back to pre-injury. How does it feel being an unsung space, I guess, being a physio that's having to kind of hold the baton and hold the torch every day to make these things aware to lots of people around you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of reflecting on it, because I hear you in the sense that I think that gerontology is historically not seen as a very sexy specialization. I think that sports physio and, cardio-resp and ICU and some of the more exciting, quote unquote, streams often get, highlighted, I suppose. So that being an unsung hero is definitely one way to look at it. I think for me, there's power in being an unsung hero, because gerontological physios or gerontology physios are really specialists at being generalists. So we have to hold multimorbidity, as you've mentioned, Bowie, the chronic conditions, the implications of how a patient operates in their, um, you know, psychosocial situation, navigation through services and carer involvement, as well as the other parts of being an older person, themes of grief and loneliness and navigating changing landscapes in milestones of your life. So we as gerontology physios hold much more than just the physiotherapy clinical skills of the condition in front of us. It really is being a master of looking at the person as a holistic whole and how the intersection of their impairment or whatever we're working on as a physiotherapist resonates with the other parts of their life as well. And that's not always just the the injury or the illness. It's also that navigation and advocacy role there as well.
Hmm. It sounds so broad in the sense that there's so much that you could undertake. Well, you're not only dealing with what's in front of you, but I guess this human that has years and years in life experience and their journey and who they are. And then using that flashlight metaphor of kind of going into the unknowns. I guess it's one of those things that probably all physios experience in their career, and especially newer grads of feeling like they're wading into the dark. What's one of your take home tips of how you manage tackling situations when they maybe not have been tackled before, or, and you're doing things that haven't been done before, or it's first time for a physio?
Yeah, such a good question. Thank you. I think for me, there has been this um, I think that on your podcast, your guests have probably talked about that concept of imposter syndrome and feeling
Yep,
inadequately
lots.
equipped or inadequately skilled or just lacking confidence to be able to navigate an unknown. And I think that for me, a couple of times in my career, there has been a real paralysis that's come from feeling those feelings of inadequacy. I think as physios generally, we are, often extremely motivated. We're goal driven. We're outcome driven. We are we have self drive. We are often good boys and girls that want to do a good job for ourselves and for our patients. And so when we're faced with that fear, it can become really paralyzing. And sometimes I know for myself, the temptation has been to just not do anything at all, to say, oh, that's not for me. There's someone smarter or someone more qualified that can take that step and provide that care or, create that role or pioneer that journey ahead. But sometimes there's power in just taking a step forward and admitting that vulnerability and being brave in the face of the unknown. I don't think that there's not a one single answer to that question. I think that the way that you journey into the unknown is by taking one imperfect step after the other and dragging people with you that can become your community so they can help you navigate it as well.
Mhm.
That's such a light bulb moment for me, actually, the way you just phrased that. And Taree, gosh, already, what a beautiful way you have with words. I've not really simplified it so much as drawing a line between the imposter syndrome kicking in and when you're, I guess, innovating in your profession or forging into something a little bit different. And I'm thinking back on my experiences in telehealth where I was a way too early adopter. And although I knew more than most because I'd done it for a while, I just constantly felt like I was just wallowing and finding my way. So it's almost like then putting words to that and saying you will feel wobbly because it is a new pathway, and that's okay, and sort of do it anyway. That's a beautiful way to put it. Now, you've already mentioned a few times advocacy, and that's obviously a big part of what you do. And as part of your impressive resume, you have been very active in the Gerontology Committee with the APA for quite a number of years. What has that been like? Do you feel that it's been something that's enabled you to move the needle on some things? Talk to that a little bit. I'm very curious.
I have had the opportunity and the real privilege to be involved in the APA Gerontology Committee over a number of years. I served my term, so they had to kick me out, which is absolutely fine and, according to the terms of reference and should be so. But it really was a wonderful opportunity to get to know the landscape of physiotherapists working in this broad, vast area across so many health settings. We have gerontology physios working in the hospitals like me, but we also have so many amazing clinicians working in the care at home space, working in residential aged care facilities. It is such a vast network of physiotherapists across Australia. So it was really wonderful to get to know their stories and trying to meet the needs from, an education perspective, from an advocacy perspective, because as we talked about at the top of the discussion today, it is such a wide area and it is such a dynamic and changing area that has been impacted by so many things, legislative changes, funding changes, COVID pandemics, aging population. We've really had to respond as a profession really creatively. And I think I've just been inspired by the amazing clinicians that are working in so many spaces with older adults. I think that drawing on that motivation through Anne-Marie that we were talking about before, Bowie, this is a space where physiotherapists are at the real intersection of answering and meeting the needs of the aging population here and now. Those needs are changing. They're going to increase, and we are so well placed to meet those needs. It might mean that we need to, as you say, Karen, innovate, rethink the way we've done things in the past and carve out an appropriate scope of practice for ourselves. But we hold so many skills that meet the needs of older people through advocacy, through care, through our capacity to make change at the macro level as well as the micro level for older adults. So I think it's a really exciting time. The subcommittee has allowed me to listen to and hear the stories of clinicians all around Australia who are doing that every day. And it is such an inspiring area to me because this to me is important work. We have, from a personal perspective, we have this changing landscape with technology, and we don't want to let our older adults be left behind in that as well. So we have the skills necessary to bring them along on the journey as well and create spaces where we can provide care, combat loneliness, create community, and meet the changing needs of this population because they're going to be demanding more of us, as they should, and we are the perfect profession to respond to those needs.
Taree, it's interesting. Like I look back when I was, I guess, in undergrad and things like that and coming through, and I guess I'm not sure if, other people felt this way, but I felt like physio was a bit segmented, like in the sense that if you're a peds physio, you're a peds physio. If you're gerontology physio, like you kind of work in your silos. And I was like, all right, I'm going to pick my silo. But as you kind of go through, as you've said, there's there's crossovers and there's a little gerontology physio inside me. And if I wanted to nurture him and make him, a bit more present, I guess the thing that's scary is gerontology is huge. Not only do you need to know all the stuff that can influence somebody over their years of life, but then the influence of some of the medical stuff that starts coming in with comorbidities, and it can be intimidating to take on such a vast array of things. So I guess, how do I nurture my little gerontology physio? If you're wanting to, and as an educator, like, what do you think's the key here to help people becoming more settled in this space?
Great question. I see the little gerontology physio in you and
Thanks.
I say welcome. I think for me, it might sound a little bit basic, but I think that the start for me is for us to challenge our own preconceived biases and subconsciously held beliefs around the aging process and try and untangle and wrestle with maybe some of the biases that we do have around ageism. And that's not a fault of the little gerontological physio. I think that that's a product of the society and the systems that we have been raised in. but we need to start to actively dismantle ageism in our own practice and in the communities around us. And then we need to ask our patients what matters to them. And we need to get back to their needs being the guiding star. So that's the first thing that we start with when we are teaching clinicians in hospital settings around how to interact and how to intersect and to get the best and most success out of our work with older adults who may be experiencing cognitive impairment or cognitive diversity. It's to ask what matters to them, and that's the guiding star always. It's also to shed some of our expert cap and get to know the person on a personal level. So start your interactions by acknowledging the person and the human in front of you, which is what we all do as physios, but I think it's really especially important when we're working with people who are living with cognitive impairment or cognitive diversity, is we start that interaction on a human level. So, g'day, my name's Taree. I'm a cognition clinical lead and I'm a physiotherapist. I'm from Perth, WA. I grew up in the northern suburbs. I have a 2-year-old Labrador named Dougie. He's the light of my life. He's a black belt in breakfast and he's a naughty boy. The things that are important to me in my life are my husband and I like to go for a long walk on the beach on a Saturday morning with a long black and an egg and bacon roll. And if I was to lose the capacity to go for my walk on a Saturday morning, that would be devastating for me. So I find what motivates and connects that person to the condition, and that's where we come from. You learn the person as they are in front of you outside of hospital or whatever clinical setting we're in, and you start to share stories and figure out what matters. And that's where you build your treatment around. In order for me to continue walking on the beach, I need cardiovascular fitness. I need balance. I probably need calf strength and range to navigate the sand. I need, the ability to respond to dynamic changes around me, especially with a Labrador. And that's where my treatment flows from there. But it's imperative that we get to the heart of what matters for that person. So I think that's the skill that I would say to nurture in a gerontology physio. See the person.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe in gerontology, this is something that you guys might, correct me if I'm wrong, see is that you've got these individuals who have had such vast experiences and vast knowledge and vast lives that, say you're a young physio, how does he connect across the generations? And how do you get to that point where you can kind of come together and see the human but also feel like you can impart your wisdom when you got somebody that's, that has kind of lived a nice long life in front of you?
Oh, what a great question. How do you interact across the generations? For me, I think it comes down to stories and listening, and listening to the privilege of hearing the story of someone who's lived so much life. Um, and in that moment, as the younger junior physiotherapist, practicing your skills, you do have skills and you do have power in that moment to impart wisdom. And it's just around the way that information is delivered. If we can learn to listen first and maybe search for their experience interacting with their condition, what has helped in the past? I can hear that you've journeyed with this for a while. Are there things that have helped you, things that we can leverage in your experience that we might be able to apply to your treatment? So leveraging their experience in that sense and forcing them, I suppose, or inviting them to reflect on how they've journeyed or lived with this condition, because often they teach us a lot about self-management as well, because they have interacted. I'm not saying that it's not challenging, because people who have a wealth of experience also have ingrained patterns of thinking, and sometimes that can be challenging to introduce, evidence-based practice into someone who's, always done it a certain way. But I think that the key in those situations is curiosity and listening, and trying to build that trust and rapport with the person in front of you so that you can be sprinkling your wisdom amongst their story, but remaining open to listening for those little flags that will go up in your mind to say, oh, maybe I can use this to create some motivation within the person in front of me. So that motivational interviewing principle about looking for readiness, getting them to acknowledge their own levers that they have in their life towards progress, illuminating how their experience can serve them. But I hear you. It's a hard challenge to overcome for sure. It can be intimidating.
It's amazing to see you watch and practice your beautifully honed soft skills in real life. I can see that there's probably not a lot of difference between how you are at work and home, because you really live that sort of that active listening. And what I'm learning is a lot so far already, in that being aware of biases towards the population of older adults, to be curious, and the power of storytelling. And none of that is clinical. That is so much work we can be doing in just those things to be aware of. I'm going to shift focus a little bit, because you've published a really important and interesting piece of work lately. Congratulations on working with patients living with dementia, delirium, and behaviours of concern, and exploration into the impact on allied health staff well-being. Excellent work on that. And what's interesting about it is, of course, there's so much beauty and upside to the work that you do, but it can be challenging. And I think it's important to talk about that. You're obviously working with teams of therapists from different backgrounds, allied health in general, in this space. Drawing broadly on the learnings from that piece of work, what is your advice to physios and any allied health professionals working in the space, how to best approach the profession to give yourself a chance at longevity and enjoyment?
Thank you first for acknowledging the paper. It is really exciting. I'm a baby researcher, so this is my first publication, but it was such a wonderful experience to hear the stories of these clinicians who really bravely and vulnerably shared their story working with patients who have dementia or delirium. It is a challenging space for clinicians, but I think it's really important to understand and recognize that being in hospital as someone who has a delirium or a dementia or other form of cognitive impairment is really hard for the patient and their family and carer. So the thing that I always try to instill in teams that I'm working and educating with is they're not trying to give you a hard time. They're having a really hard time, because there's brain change there and a reduced resilience and a vulnerability to stressors that all of us have in the everyday workings of clinical work as well. But having that extra vulnerability means that it's really, really hard. Those patients at times are not relying on their wizard brain, as we sometimes call it. They've reverted back to the lizard brain, that more primal sort of part of the brain that's responding to stress in the environment around us. So what that can look like in practice is what we've deemed behaviours of concern in this paper. But I will take a moment to challenge our own labelling there, because we know that behaviours in patients who have cognitive impairment or difference are usually a form of communication where there's an unmet need, and we're not understanding necessarily what that need is, and we need to meet that person where they're at to try and meet those needs. So we need to reframe the way we think about behaviours of concern and reconsider them as communication and what is the unmet need in this moment, and how can I respond using my wizard brain because I have more access and capacity in this moment. But it's not easy. And so the stories of our participants told us that they can experience feelings of burnout, feelings of eroded resilience, feelings of stress and fatigue, brain fog, those things that sometimes show up in our outside lives as well as in our work lives, which can be really challenging to navigate. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that exists, and we need systems that are going to support our clinicians to support their own well-being, but also provide systems that help meet the well-being needs of clinicians working in this space. One of the really interesting findings from that work was the interaction and the intersection between person-centered care, or like gold standard care, the care that we all want to deliver as allied health or physios, versus what we can achieve with the resources and time that we have available to us. And often those two things don't match in reality. What we want to do for our patients and what we have capacity to do for whatever reason is different. And that caused distress in our participants. So that moral distress where you can't provide what you want to for your person, that person-centered or dementia-friendly care, for whatever constraint it might be, organisationally, systemically, financially, time constraints, so many things that impact on clinicians. And my best friend and I talk about this a lot, like navigating that intersection of gold standard versus pragmatic care, I suppose. And that caused distress for our participants. And I think it's a really good conversation to have about how we navigate that space, because it shows up not just in gerontology, it shows up throughout the whole spectrum of physiotherapy work. And how do we reconcile that, I guess, as clinicians? And we were discussing this, and I was reminded about a plane ride that I had coming home from the APA conference last year. I was sat near Dr. Kate Lawler, who is one of my mentors and a wonderful dementia researcher. She's a physiotherapist. And she, for the first time in my life, taught me a story, which I think is a well-known parable, but I hadn't heard it before. We were talking about this concept of not being able to provide the care that we want to, and how distressing that is for reasons that are external to our control. And I got a bit teary. I was feeling a little bit emotional about it, because I acknowledge that we're not doing everything we can as a system to meet the needs of patients who are living with dementia in our hospital systems, which is my particular area. And she, gave me a tissue and offered me a glass of wine, which was very compassionate. And she said, "Have you heard the story of the starfish?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, "One day there was a man walking along the beach, and he came across a little girl as up ahead on the beach. Now, there had just been a really bad storm, and so the beach was covered in all of these starfish, a mixture of dead or dying starfish. Unfortunately, with the tide, they had all been brought in with the storm. And as he got closer, he noticed that the little girl was picking up a starfish and looking at it, and then throwing it back into the ocean. And then she'd look down and pick up another starfish and look at it and throw it into the ocean. And he had a little chuckle to himself. And as he got closer, he said, "Little girl, what are you doing?" And she said, "I'm throwing starfish back into the ocean." And he looked around himself and said, "Look at these thousands of starfish. All of them are, doomed. They're being beached on this beach. How can you possibly think that you're going to, save all of these starfish?" And the little girl thought about it, and she reached down and picked up another one and looked at it and threw it into the ocean. And she said, "Well, I made a difference for that one." And then she reached down and picked up another one, and she said, "Well, I'm making a difference for this one as well," and threw it back into the ocean. And then it clicked to him, "Oh, yes, you are making a difference for that person in front of you." So that really made me reflect on the fact that no, we actually can't fix every problem. We can't see every person with the amount of time and capacity, care, compassion, joy and love and gold standard that we can with, every single patient, but we can make a difference for the person in front of us. And I think that sometimes that's okay. We need to work and advocate to dismantle systems that don't allow us to deliver gold standard care, but we do make a difference for the person in front of us. And that, I think, can help to answer some of that moral distress, to know that you actually do make a difference for the person in front of you.
What a beautiful story, Taree. Like, it's just, it's very evident that as Kaz said, your soft skills are phenomenal, and your connection is through the us just talking online is amazing. And it's a beautiful, optimistic way to look at, sometimes a feeling of an insurmountable amount of work that sometimes can face us. It's physios, whether that's helping patients, trying to be on top of the profession, huge amounts of information that out there that sometimes can be pessimistic, and to try and to wade through the ocean in optimism. I just have a question for you now, as for your, in your life, when you're separating yourself from work. So, we've got a lot of listeners that will probably be inpatient hospitals, and sometimes you see things that are hard. You see you see the beach full of starfish. What's your way to try and reconnect, or disconnect from work and reconnect as a human when are around potentially hard things, and sometimes sad situations? What's your strategies?
Yeah, great question, and such a hard one to navigate. I think we as physiotherapists are very people, and we can really take on sometimes the emotions of the people that we journey with. And that's such a privilege that we have as physiotherapists, is often meeting people in their most vulnerable moments, whether that's injury or illness or the height of their career and all the pressure that comes with that. We journey with people at their most vulnerable, and it's hard sometimes to separate the patient's story from your own story, or to reflect and ruminate on the experience of the patient that you're working with. So I think it's a really important, and it's important to acknowledge how hard that can be. I think for me, I've had to try and reframe my mind from being sad and angry at the situations and the people involved, to being advocating and railing against systems that create some of the situations that people find themselves in. So putting my energy towards challenging the systems, making them better, questioning where they are not meeting the needs of those who access them. And that's, through things that physios are so equipped to do, which is quality improvement, it's research, it's advocacy, it's speaking up on behalf of our patients. So we can do those things, but then it is so important that we have systems of support in place in our personal lives to fill up our own cups. So whatever that looks like for you is the right way to go about it. For me, I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I like to play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends every couple of months. I like to play video games. I read fantasy books. I'm a big Swiftie, so I've got my Taylor Swift music that I put in, and that helps me to release when I need to. And when I say release, I mean putting on, Shake It Off by Taylor Swift and dancing around the living room and having that physical release of that emotion. Or it might be, putting on The Notebook and having a good old cry, and allowing those emotions to be released and have a dynamic nature to them, so that I'm not carrying them on into the rest of my day. But that's going to look absolutely different to everybody else. It might look like having a really great CrossFit session. It might be look like going for a hike. It might be look like going into the ocean and feeling that ice cold water on your face. But I think it's important that we have those hobbies and interests and outlets outside of work that help us to fill up our cup, so that we have capacity to meet the needs of our patients and to hold them in their journeys and listen with compassion, not only for them, but having compassion to listen to ourselves as well. So that's, I guess, a challenge that we need to find. And I think the other thing with protecting our peace when we're working with people who are in difficult situations that can bring up stuff for us is to acknowledge that we are in a caring profession, and we are often at the coalface of humans doing human work a lot of the time. And that can, you know, has an impact on how we respond to the world around us, right? Like we maybe don't have that capacity to like listen to the news, or world events can feel really big because we're already pouring out so much of our compassion in our everyday work. So I think it's important to acknowledge your own capacity and your own boundaries and really respect those in whatever way that looks like for you as a clinician. So treating your patients with compassion, but also treating yourself with compassion.
Mhm.
It's such good advice. And what I really hear there is that it's not about blocking out those feelings when you walk away. It's directing those emotions, still feeling them, but directing them into different things and still allowing them to flow through your body. So I really resonate with that. I think everyone's drivers are a little bit different, but when we crossed paths, which was more early on in your gerontology career, Taree, what really struck me was that you were very intrinsically driven. You weren't doing things because it was your job requirement or because you wanted to forge ahead in your career. You would be driven to do things because it felt like the right thing to do and that you could help that person, you could make a difference. And which is why I've been very interested to sort of follow your career. And it is just, you've gone from strength to strength. Who do you think suits a career in gerontology?
All of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Oh, let out that little gerontologist inside you. Let them grow. I love it.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that if we all look at what we're doing as physiotherapists, I think we're all interacting in the gerontology way. I think we all have those skills.
Yeah, Turi, I think one thing that I've learned from listening to you is your soft skills, and I think I've been reflecting on this concept of like how active listening and learning people's journeys and all these things are in gerontology are interwoven into that side of physiotherapy, and we talk sometimes to sports physios, musc physios, or and lots of different areas about developing soft skills. I think the thing I've taken away from this is probably need to become better at being a gerontological physio for me to keep getting better at connecting with patients. It's a real amazing way to actually connect with a human, and that's and care rather than just fix problems that sometimes we can get focused on. So thank you. It's really lovely to kind of see that side and just watch, I guess, somebody that's very good at it in the way they do it.
It's so true. And I think we always look to find nuggets of knowledge that are applicable across the spectrum of specialties. But I had no idea just how much of what you've shared with us today would be applicable to all of us. So we really appreciate your time. It's been captivating to listen to you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much,
Thank you both. What a joy. Thank you.
Thanks. Wow, such a beautiful episode. And I just, that sense of connection that we talk about in physio, I felt like you could just feel it there. And so lovely for her to both have this high level of passion and compassion in what she does, but also then to talk about imposter syndrome and this honesty around the unknowns. So just such a lovely journey through her lens of what gerontology is and how it spans into all the other areas of physio. I really just enjoyed listening to her, and so many little take-home points that I'm just going to reflect on in my life and how I treat as a physio. So yeah, amazing.
And of course, here at Off Script Physio, we love to make a donation to a charity that is meaningful to our guests, to thank them for their time and to pay it forward. And Taree has chosen Dementia Australia, which states whether you're living with dementia, caring for someone, seeking information or training, supporting the cause, or contributing to research, we're here for you. You can find more information about Dementia Australia in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time this week. We look forward to catching up with you again next week.